Hi, and welcome. Thank you for joining me. We're up on the hill behind my studios north in rural Ashfield, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful day in mid-September. As you can see, colors are just beginning to change a little bit, very slightly. In another month, this will be ablaze with color. Just wanted to give you an idea of the settings here at Studio North. The actual studio building is behind that little grove of birch trees, but you can't see it at the moment. So we're going to be talking today and doing a demo with the Imprimitura technique. Imprimitura literally means the first color, but let me get down to the studio and talk to you a little bit about that before we actually go out into the field. So let's head down there. Talk to you about the Imprimitura technique for a few minutes before we actually go out and I demonstrate it for you in the landscape painting. This is an excerpt from a workshop that I teach entitled Painting Techniques of the Masters, 500 Years in 5 Days. Rather bold statement, but it's basically a brief survey of very pivotal developments in the history of oil painting. And it starts at the beginning of oil painting in Europe, even though oils were in existence for some time in the Middle East, etc. But it begins with Northern Europe, where Van Eyck brothers were attributed with basically the development of oil painting technique as it came from tempera painting and fresco. And it was a very long, time-consuming, intensive process, preparing wood panels with gesso, traditional gesso, taking a very detailed drawing, then transferring it to the panel, then inking it in which case you're establishing very strong. Your composition has already been resolved, and then you lay in what was called a verdaccio, and that was a grayish green color. And this was from a demo from a workshop I had taught. And the verdaccio is, for best of our knowledge, something like a yellow ochre, carbon black, and white mixture that makes a grayish green. So in this particular demo, I had the participants in the workshop actually start with drawing the still life. That way you're actually covering all the bases of the learning process. It's a great place to start if you're just coming into painting and drawing. Correct the drawing, make your corrections, transfer it to the panel, and then add the verdaccio, which is basically a study of values. It's all in this gray tones. Here I've done the first glaze, because then at that point, once the verdaccio is dried, and oftentimes this was done in tempera paint, then the oils were applied on top in glazes, in thin layers of color, and using transparent colors. So the opaque was underneath, transparent on top. Imprimitura kind of reverses that. But just to give you an idea, this particular quick little sketch, basically, I didn't do the drawing and the transfer. I basically worked directly with the verdaccio colors onto the canvas, and did an eyeball of the still life, and so that and it was done in alkyds, so that the next day I could show the glazing. Actually, it was 2 days later, and the red there. So just to give you an idea, I'm using alkyd painting medium. This one happens to be a Grumbacher one. And I'm using a mixture of burnt sienna and burnt umber, because this was a metal copper base. And these are semi-transparent colors. You want to use transparent or semi-transparent colors. And then you put a very thin coat of color over that. And I'm not going to go into great detail of it, but I just want to show you how that works. And then sometimes you would then build up the highlights again in certain areas, and perhaps even do another glaze of color or a different color if you wanted to change that. You know, I might put some blues in here to make a violet and richness in the depth of the shadow area. And so in this way, you do your glazing. This is called spot glazing. It's one area. Sometimes you glaze over a whole surface area to unify the painting. But I'm getting into a whole different workshop video on glazing. So let's stop there. The point is, I want to show you this because this is a very time-consuming process. Between each color and each layer of glaze, and back then you'd use a glazing medium, and a lot of artists still use it, and I used for many years, a mixture of Damar varnish, linseed oil, turpentine, rectified turpentine, a little cobalt dryer, different formulas. Now I just use alkyd resin of some sort if I'm doing some glazing. But anyway, you can see they would have to put the panel against the wall, back, you know, face against the wall, and let it dry several weeks or longer between colors. Let me start another panel, etc. Very time consuming. So as this painting technique came to Italy, and artists were doing more and more work beyond just that of the church, but also you know, commissions for nobility, etc., portraits and such, history paintings. The desire to move faster, to paint more rapidly, to develop more techniques started happening, and that's where Imprimitura came in. It literally means, and this is the beginning of the Renaissance, the first color. Imprimitura, the first color. So this then developed into many different techniques, many different artists using it and developed different things with it. I'm going to show you one variation of a technique today. I'm going to show you a few images of paintings that I left in the stage of Imprimitura that were just works that you know, I liked the way they look as a monochromatic painting. They held a nice energy. So they were left like that. Other times they were just used as underpaintings. It's a great way to establish the values rapidly in a plein air painting like we'll see today. In an hour or so you really can lay out your composition, your values, everything, and then drop your colors in on top of that. And that's what the demo will be about. But yeah, as I was saying, many different artists develop different ways of working it. Some artists, even contemporary artists today, many artists have developed whole careers based around Imprimitura painting. There's some great artists working today that do Imprimitura, monochromatic paintings. And you know, Titian, for example, there's, whether it's true or not, you always hear the artist said stories. You know, I read once about one of his studio assistants saying that Titian didn't draw on his canvas as had previously done it and was commonplace. You know, supposedly Michelangelo criticized him as someone who never learned to draw. But anyway, he was a really modern painter, and he worked directly into the Imprimitura, making corrections, doing it. You can see in many of the works the pedimenti, the little changes, change of directions that happen in the course of the process of painting. And he would then add frottis and glazes and direct painting on top of that. And so many painters, you know, up to, you know, the Impressionists, you know, would stain, like Monet was known to stain some of his canvases red, so that as he put the greens on for foliage, the red would shimmer through and pop and make the green really pop. And that stain, that first color, is an Imprimitura. Any other layers of color are not Imprimituras. There's only one. It's the first color you put on. That's the very meaning of the word. And then other, you know, techniques are added on top of that. So, you know, that whole idea that, you know, you're staining the canvas, first of all, get rid of that white so that it's not glaring at you. You can judge your values better against a mid-value stain. You know, Rembrandt liked umbers, Rubens, you know, grayish silvers. Yeah, so let's go out to the field and get to painting so you can actually see it. So here we are near our home in Ashfield. Ayana, my daughter, eldest daughter, and I were driving around looking for something interesting to paint. And there's plenty here. And I saw this from the side of the car and I said, yeah, this will make an interesting subject. So let's begin. The Imprimitura. And typically I would often do thumbnail sketches, but we're very limited for time. We have just about an hour. And the beauty of this Imprimitura method, well, there's many aspects of it that are great. One of them is you can really nail a value study very quickly. And if you want to add color to it later, you can do that. Sometimes they're just so beautiful by themselves. Artists have created whole careers just from the Imprimitura. I'm working on a oil primed canvas. So it's important on a board that's mounted to a board. It's ideally better to use oil priming than an acrylic priming. It's much easier for all the paint to be able to be wiped off. So you're working transparently with the Imprimitura. So because I'm not actually doing a sketch, I'm creating this in my mind's eye, the composition. I'm going to kind of sketch it as I lay in the Imprimitura and go through a variety of options myself. I'm using Gamsol, which is a mineral spirits, as a thinner. And so let's get right into it. So first of all, it's just coating the canvas with the paint. That is actually the Imprimitura. And I'm looking as I'm doing this, thinking about where I'm going to lay things in. And this is not going to be in any way permanent. It's just a way of me to think as I'm doing this. You know, I'm thinking about where I'm putting things, and I can adjust this at any point, any time, and make changes. And again, I'm just thinking, kind of thinking out loud as I do this. And just kind of playing with it as I go. And you can kind of see that I'm kind of thinking where things are going and maybe changing them a little bit as I'm doing this. You know, always the most important thing in your painting is your intention. Why are you doing this painting? What is it you're trying to say? And to me, it has to do with what caught my eye was the way the light was hitting this, the contrast of the light hitting the roof line, the deep shadow of the building itself, but also the beautiful foliage and the light transparency of that, as well as that of the goldenrod and this rock, the whole way the light was hitting things. Just a few minutes earlier, the shadows, of course the sun is moving quickly, were coming across behind the rock. Paint across the whole canvas. Everything is covered. And that's the Imprimitura. It's done. Now, actually, that is one of the stages of Imprimitura painting. Okay? Technically, that is it. It's the first color. Different artists would tone the canvas with different colors. By the way, I didn't mention, I'm using a mixture here of raw umber, a Grumbacher raw umber. I sometimes mix an alkyd in it, will help speed the drying of it. This is a transparent earth red to give it a little bit more warmth. That's made by Gamblin. And then a little bit of sepia to add dark. The sepia is a convenience color that has black, it has brown, it has yellow, it has red in it. And it's a nice dark, earthy, rich color. Now that I've got this coated, I'm going to go looking at boxing in basically the shapes that I want. You know, I'm looking at basically this building here. And I'm not going after detail by any means at this point. I'm looking at the foliage in the back, darkening that around, kind of painting around that tree that's behind the house. And then since I think I like where that roof line's going to be, I'm going to wipe out some of that where the light is. And then carve that shape a little bit. We've got different foliage coming off of that, and shadow. And then I'm deciding how, I'm judging the distance of how long I want to make that. This area here is going to be the darkest area. That is that doorway in there. And a sense of mystery to that. And in fact, you know, I was looking at that. Do I want that tapestry? Can you focus on the actual image that I'm painting on? No. To me, that doesn't say anything. What I think I want in that doorway is going to be perhaps a figure in the shadows, and that'll be something I'll add in a little later. But you know, it would be something back here that will be in there. That would be the secondary or maybe primary focus point. And then we have more foliage. And you're thinking here in terms of values as you're painting this. And I'm putting in darks because I'm going to then lift up my lights from that. So here we have the goldenrod. And I'm going to put the edge. I always keep a little bit of the Gamsol in a separate cup. The one I was dipping in before is actually my brush cleaner. The sediment drops to the bottom, you know, the pigments, and then you could scoop off the top for most of what you want to do, but if I want it really clean, I'll just grab a little bit there and push it up. I love these little paint scrapers. They're rubber tipped paint shapers, I think they call them. The way that sediment that drops to the bottom of the cleaning pan, that is mud, and actually it was used for imprimituras by many artists for centuries. In fact, mud was not a taboo thing. It was a color. It's a color in the artist's palette. And I'm going to use some of this now because I want to actually create a textural effect. So I'm going to let some of that drip. Makes a nice effect. I'm going to give myself a little bit more room here. The shadow drops in, across, and then comes up. I'm just going to take my paint scraper at this point so that I know that this is still quite wet from the dab some of that up. For that goldenrod. Now I'm looking at that and seeing, wow, that's much longer than I gave it the information here. So I'm going to spread that out quite a bit. Actually goes beyond the center line of that piece. I've moved it higher up into the picture plane because compositionally it wouldn't fit. But I can do that. I'm the artist. I can move things, change it any way I want. And so you can see I'm laying stuff in now. So the sun is moving very quickly, and in the last 5 minutes since we shut it off, I moved the composition over to the left. I didn't like, first of all, that it was so centered, and it was so easy to do. I simply just wipe things out and wipe things away. I also wanted to catch a little bit more of that clothesline in there, which I will, get in a little bit more as this paint tacks up a little bit. But that's where we're at, and I moved the rock over slightly and back a little bit. It's similar to watercolor in the sense when you want it a little bit more opaque, you use the paint thicker. So as we're getting the paint a little bit more set up and it's at a tacky stage, I'm going to start pulling out now some of this foliage that is backlit from the sun. That's quite beautiful. It's one of the things that attracted me to this. And I'm not going to pull out every single leaf, but every once in a while there'll be an indication of a leaf shape. I'm going to actually bring a couple right into this dark here. That's really nice. And set it up against the dark behind there. And it's about, painting around and painting in and removing, and then painting some more. Last little bit, we're very pressured on time here. Our light is changing constantly, of course, that's plein air. But, getting these little figures back here in the background. I think I've got two figures going on. Perhaps there's a conversation as to what to do with what's in the barn. But, for the moment, it's captured, I think, enough information for what I want to say. It can be tweaked a bit more. Of course, constantly it's important to step back and look at the complete whole. Where does it need to be knocked down? What are the edges doing? Where does it need a little bit more refinement, adding some of those darker darks. I was punching out this little bit here where the laundry is, and then these foliage in front of it. So, for just over an hour, we've got a basic sketch going on. It's really drawing with paint, so to speak. And from here, you could leave it as is a work on itself, or add color to it, depending on how you want to go with that. And in the next video, I am going to demo how you add color to the Imprimitura painting. So I've moved the piece after working on it for another 10 minutes to behind my studio now, so that we can get a better shot at it, hopefully, with more even light. So, in those 10 minutes I worked on increasing the darks in here, as well as softening some of the edges all around, and increasing some darks, bringing out some light, Just the typical tweaks that you would do when you step back and you look and you see, all right, what next? Um, what, when you look at a painting is what makes it work is, are the parts congruent with the whole, and is that congruency in simpatico, or is it in the direction of the artist's intention, what you set out to do? And that's how I would judge the success of a piece, how well it's doing that. Now at this point, I could choose to add color, and if I were working, continuing to work in plein air, I would just lay the color on top of the Imprimitura, and even working it wet into wet, using some alkyds, it starts to dry up very quickly. I could even probably put thin glazes of color on certain areas, but typically with the Imprimitura, you let the darks show through, and you're basically building up impasto, thick layers of paint with opaque paints in the lighter areas, but sometimes glazes as well. It's really up to you as an individual how you want to do that, and I'll show that in another video. I think we'll do one, a complete one when we have a little bit more time. The other thing is, I could also work on this in the studio. There's enough information in the form of the light, etc., that I could finish this in the studio. And whether I actually want to get the local color or actually create imaginary color, it's really up to me again as the individual artist. I'm not always so interested in the local color. I'm interested in what is the painting saying to me. What does the painting ask in terms of everything, really? To me, it's not about representing, quote, reality, whatever that is. It's about creating a painting. And again, what my intention was, what attracted me here, the light, particularly hitting that roof very strong, had to me that light is a mystical force, and it had that sense to it, how it hit there, also hit the ground. But this strong angle is where your first attention probably will hit, because of the high contrast there. It's a sharp angle against a lot of soft edges as well as organic shapes, and your eye is going to move around down towards the sparkle that's coming off the leaves and across here and the path, and back up along into the tree, and bring you actually into the really the subtle focus point of interest right here, which is these two figures that are kind of mystic, it has this mystical connotation because of overall color and atmosphere, but it's also it's shrouded in a mystery. You don't really know what's going on in there. It allows you as a viewer to really create a story of your own to it, which is I think is pretty nice. When I do add color, and I'll probably film that as well in the studio, I will lay a couch on top of that. What that means is a layer of oil. In this case, I'd probably use retouch varnish, which is a Damar, and then that will create an evenness. There are areas here where it's sunken in, it's flat, and that'll bring up an even gloss to the whole surface of the painting again, and also allow me to work wet in wet. I could use a variety of different things as a couch. Because I've done alkyd with it, some people use alkyd resin. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but that's when, we'd add the glazes as well as the impasto work on top of that. Anyway, so this is one of many ways of doing an Imprimitura method. It's one of the ways I like to do it. Every time I paint, I do something a little bit different, but it works for me. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting and maybe something useful for you. And join me at one of the workshops, either in Massachusetts or one of the other locations of the U.S., or come on down to Mexico to Casa de los Artistas and let's paint together. Meanwhile, happy painting.